Good morning from southeastern Finland in northern Europe. I'm still going to continue for 4 years my series of historical videos about selected events from the past, and those years are 1919, 1924, 1929, and 1934. Then in 2020, God willing, I will upload historical event videos for the years 1920, 1925, 1930, 1935, 1940, 1945, 1950, 1955, 1960, 1965, 1970, 1975, 1980, 1985, 1990, 1995, 2000, 2005, 2010, and 2015. 1919 was the year when the First World War, whose fighting officially had ended, at least in Europe, in November 1918, ended with the Treaty of Versailles, signed in the Hall of Mirrors of the Versailles Palace near Paris in northeastern France. 1919 was also the year when two British aviators or flyers, Mr. Alcock and Mr. Brown, became the first individuals to fly across the North Atlantic, albeit they used the shortest route possible, or one of the shortest routes possible, from Newfoundland, which is now Canada's easternmost province, to Ireland. 1919 was also the year when the first officially fully democratic form of government came into effect in Germany, named after the place or the city where the National Assembly met because of unrest in Berlin, Germany's capital, the so-called Weimar Republic. 1919 was also the year when Finland officially became a democratic republic, following the monarchists' failed attempt to persuade a German prince, Mr. Friedrich Karl, to take the Finnish throne. 1919 was also the year when one of the most peculiar amendments to the United States Constitution came into effect, meaning prohibition. In other words, the recreational drinking of alcohol, in other words, drinking alcohol for fun, became illegal. Also, technically, drinking alcohol at meals became illegal. Drinking alcohol as a part of the Holy Communion or the Lord's Supper or some other religious ceremony still was legal. Using alcohol as a medicine was still legal, and using alcohol for scientific experiments was also legal. And of course, using alcohol to thoroughly clean surfaces and rooms and so forth, that was legal. In the same year, the United States Congress passed the amendment which gave women the right to vote in all political elections, whether federal, state, or local. Several states had already enfranchised women, starting in 1869, when the territory of Montana had given its adult female citizens the right to vote. (1919) was also the year when the whites, meaning conservatives and liberals, fighting against the Bolsheviks or communists in the Russian Civil War, suffered some painful defeats. General Nikolai or Nicholas Yudenich tried to invade St. Petersburg or Petrograd, which had been since the early 18th century Russia's capital. In 1918, with the takeover of Bolsheviks, or the Bolshevik Revolution, the capital had been moved back to Moscow. Anyway, General Yudenich tried to conquer Petrograd, but his attack collapsed just short of the capital. And after that, the Whites were in retreat. In the Russian Civil War, they would decisively be defeated by the autumn of 1920. So let us look at 1919 more in detail. Wikipedia is my main source in these events. Well, yes, I could say also that in 1919, the first parliamentary resurrected Poland, or restored Poland, were held. In 1919, those constituent assembly elections were held also in at least Estonia, possibly also in Latvia and Lithuania. And yes, national parliamentary elections were held also in France and were won by the Bloc National, or the National Bloc, a center-right electoral alliance. And in 1919, 73 elected members of the British House of Commons, meaning the lower house of the British Parliament, who refused to take the oath to serve in the British Parliament, established the Dáil-Éireann, or the Irish National Assembly, and elected Mr. Eamon de Valera, an Irish nationalist and sovereigntist, as the first head of state. This would lead Britain eventually to grant a wide self-government to the Irish Free State, the southern 26 counties of the island of Ireland, while the 6 northern, or at least actually northeastern counties, known as Ulster, would remain more tightly as a part of the United Kingdom, and Northern Ireland still officially belongs to the United Kingdom, even though it has a fairly wide measure of self-government now and does also have its regional legislature. (1919) was a so-called common year, a 365-day year, and in the Gregorian calendar it began on Wednesday. In the Julian calendar it began on Tuesday. On January the 1st, 1919, the Czechoslovak legions occupied much of the self-proclaimed free city of Pressburg, now Bratislava, Slovakia's capital, enforcing its incorporation into the new Republic of Czechoslovakia. Edsel Ford succeeded his aging father, Henry Ford, as the head of the Ford Motor Company. Excuse me. Between January the 2nd and 22nd, the Red Armies, meaning the Bolshevik or Soviet Communist armies, Caspian Caucasian Front, began the Northern Caucasus operation against the White Army, but failed to make progress. The Faisal-Weizmann Agreement was signed by Emir Faisal, representing the Arab Kingdom of Hejaz, and the Zionist leader Mr. Chaim Weizmann, for Arab-Jewish cooperation in the development of a Jewish homeland in Palestine and an Arab nation in a large part of the Middle East. On January the 5th, the Spartacus Uprising of German communists began in Berlin, Germany. And the German Workers' Party, or Deutsche Arbeiterpartei in German, predecessor of the National Socialist German Workers' Party, better known as Nazi Party, was formed by the merger of Mr. Anton Drexler's Committee of Independent Workmen with journalist Karl Harrer's Political Workers' Circle. On January the 7th, the tragic week in Argentina, South America, an anarchist uprising in the country's capital, Buenos Aires, began, and official forces later suppressed it. In the Estonian War of Independence, with Soviet Russian forces just 40 kilometers away from the capital, Tallinn, Estonian forces started a general and successful counter-offensive against the Red Army. On January the 6th, passed away in his sleep at the age of 60, former United States President Theodore Roosevelt, who had been in office from September 1901, following the fatal wounding of his, since September 1901, following the fatal wounding by Mr. Leon Czolgosz of his predecessor, President William McKinley, until the end of his second term in March 1909. In 1912, he had sought unsuccessfully a return to the White House, effective in March 1913, as the Progressive or Bull Moose Party's candidate. He died in his sleep of a heart attack in Oyster Bay, New York State, and was buried on January the 8th. The Spartacus Uprising ended in Berlin on January the 13th, 1919. Also, the workers' councils in Berlin ended the general strike. On January the 15th, 1919, two prominent German social democrats, Miss Rosa Luxemburg, who was actually of Polish Jewish origin, and Mr. Karl Liebknecht were murdered after the unsuccessful Spartacist uprising. On January the 16th, 1919, the 18th Amendment to the United States Constitution authorizing prohibition was ratified. It would be repealed in 1933, following a widespread willful breach of that amendment. And the proliferation of bootlegging industries also, such mafiosos and organized crime leaders as Mr. Al Capone benefited a lot from the disregard for prohibition. On the same day, pianist Ignacy Jan Paderewski became the second prime minister or head of government of Poland. On January the 18th, the Paris Peace Conference opened in France, with delegates from 27 countries attending the meetings at the Palace of Versailles. On January the 19th, 1919, the German federal parliamentary election for the National Assembly was held. The forces the parties most in favor of a Western-style parliamentary democracy, meaning the Social Democrats or the majority Social Democrats, the centrists, and the Democrats or left-wing liberals received over 3/4 of the votes, paving the way for the passage later that year of the Weimar Republic's constitution, which established a semi-presidential regime with a strong elected directly elected president, but also the government headed by the Reich Chancellor or Federal Prime Minister, who was responsible to the Reichstag or the Federal Parliament's lower house. However, the president had the right to dismiss the Reich Chancellor and to appoint one. He also had the right, for example, to dissolve the the Reichstag, and to call early federal elections. In a state of emergency, the Reich president also could rule by decree, which then, to some extent, hastened the Weimar Republic's demise in the early 1930s. The women received the right to vote. On January the 25th, 1919, the League of Nations was founded in Paris, France. On February the 3rd, 1919, in the Russian Civil War, Soviet troops occupied the Ukraine. On February the 5th, the United Artists, or UA, was incorporated by D.W. Griffith, Charlie Chaplin, Mary Pickford, and Douglas Fairbanks. On February the 11th, 1919, the National Assembly elected Mr. Friedrich Ebert, a moderate social democrat, as the first president or state president of Germany. On February the 26th, 1919, an act of the United States Congress established most of the Grand Canyon, as a United States national park. On March the 1st, 1919, the March the 1st movement against Japanese colonial rule, Japan had in 1910 forcibly occupied and annexed Korea. The entire Korean peninsula, now, of course, divided into the communist North Korea and the democratic South Korea. But anyway, a movement favoring Korea's separation from Japan and the restoration of its independence was therefore formed. On March the 2nd, 1919, the founding Congress of the Comintern, an international alliance of the world's communist parties, opened in Moscow, Soviet Russia. And on March the 4th, 1919, the Communist International, or Comintern, was founded. On March the 17th, the Commonwealth of the Philippines was established. On March the 21st, the Hungarian Soviet Republic, a short-lived communist regime, was established by Mr. Béla Kun. On March the 23rd and 24th, Charles I, the last emperor of the already dissolved Austro-Hungarian Empire, left Austria for exile in Switzerland. He would die in 1922. On March the 31st, 1919, a general strike began in the rural industrial region of Western Germany. On April the 10th, 1919, the Mexican revolution leader, Mr. Emiliano Zapata, was ambushed and shot dead in Morelos. On April the 15th, 1919, the Save the Children Fund was created in Britain to raise money for the relief of German and Austrian children. On April the 23rd, the Estonian Constituent Assembly convened its first session. It was dominated by the centrist and left-wing parties. On May the 1st, 1919, a large left-wing demonstration in France led to a violent confrontation with the police. On May the 9th, 1919, in Belgium, a new electoral law introduced universal manhood suffrage and gave the franchise to certain classes of women.
Joko sulla rupesi aamupala
Joo, pian.
Me ollaan nyt menossa
Joo, pian tulen.
ruokapöytään.
On May the 17th, the Committee of 1,000 formed to oppose the Winnipeg general strike in Manitoba, Western Canada. Then, on June the 4th, the United States Congress approved the 19th Amendment to the United States Constitution, which would guarantee suffrage or the right to vote to all adult female citizens of the United States, and sent it to the states for ratification. On June the 28th, 1919, the Treaty of Versailles was signed, formally ending the First World War. On the same day, the International Labour Organization was established as an agency of the League of Nations. On July the 11th, 1919, the 8-hour day and free Sunday became law for workers in the Netherlands, Western Europe. On August the 1st, 1919, Béla Kun's Hungarian Soviet Republic collapsed. On August the 11th, in Germany, the Weimar Constitution was proclaimed to be in effect or ratified. Then, from September the 1st to October the 2nd, 1919, in the Russian Civil War, Admiral Alexander Kolchak launched his final offensive in the Tobolsk operation, defeating the Red Army. On September the 3rd, Mr. Jan Smuts became the second Prime Minister of South Africa. On October the 2nd, 1919, US President Woodrow Wilson suffered a nearly fatal stroke, rendering him an invalid or handicapped person for the remainder of his life. Interestingly, he did not resign his office, nor was the United States Congress bold enough to declare him incompetent to serve. In 1967, if I remember correctly, an amendment to the US Constitution made a provision for the possibility in which the United States president would be, for some reason, physical or other disability, unable to serve, in which case the vice president would succeed him. On October the 7th, 1919, the Dutch airline KLM was formed. As of 2019, it is the world's oldest airline, still flying under its original name. On November the 1st, 1919, the coal strike of 1919 began in the United States by the United Mine Workers under John L. Lewis. A final agreement was reached on December the 10th. On December the 1st, 1919, American-born Nancy Astor, Viscountess Astor, became the first woman to take her seat in the House of Commons of the United Kingdom, having become the second woman to be elected to that legislature or legislative body or chamber on November the 28th. The 1918 Representation of the People Act in Britain had enfranchised the British female citizens who were at least 30 years old. In 1928, if I remember correctly, the minimum age required for eligibility for voting and candidacy to the House of Commons would be dropped to 21 years also for the British female citizens. It had already been dropped to 21 for the British male citizens, by the Representation of the People Act in 1918. On December the 5th, 1919, the Turkish Ministry of War released Greeks, Armenians, and Jews from military service. On December the 21st, the United States deported 249 people, including anarchist Emma Goldman, to Russia on the USAT Buford. On December the 23rd, the Sex Disqualification or Removal Act 1919 became law in the United Kingdom. On December the 26th, American baseball player Mr. Babe Ruth was traded by the Boston Red Sox to the New York Yankees for $125,000 of that time, the largest sum ever paid for a player at this time, a deal made public at the beginning of January 1920.